Good morning, Horizon. We're to Holy Saturday, the day before Easter, and I wanted to read you the text that follows the crucifixion and death of Jesus as a way of entering into Holy Saturday. It's John 19:38 through 42. Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who had earlier visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices in the strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, which no one had ever been laid, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. So a couple of things. First of all, whenever we have somebody named by name, Joseph, Nicodemus, they would have been known by the early church. So these would have been men who would have been prominent in the early church, disciples. And so people would have recognized those names. The second thing you have to recognize is that both of these men were attracted to Jesus, but it took a tremendous bit of courage to do what they did. Only family members could ask for the body of one that was executed by the state. These guys were not. So they could have been aligned with him. Jesus was executed essentially for treason against the state. And so by aligning and asking for his body, they could have been accused of treason, and they could have gotten in trouble, had property seized, the whole bit. But regardless, they took the risk, and they took the body, and they wrapped it in linens and gave fairly expensive procedures in terms of preparing the body for burial, the 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. They took it to Joseph's tomb, which was nearby, because it was the day of preparation. At the close of the day, they laid the body there. And then the Jewish Sabbath started. So the idea on the Sabbath is you don't go out, you don't shop, you stay in your homes, you do no work, right? So I want you to picture now these two and all of Jesus' family, his friends, his disciples, having to stay essentially quiet, essentially in their home, without able to distract themselves. It's interesting because we're in the place of shelter in place where we're having to stay in our homes. And we have a lot more to distract us than they would have had there. But what they would have had on their minds, their imaginations, is the execution of a man that they loved just 12 hours, 24 hours earlier. For these disciples, it would have been a day when their hopes and dreams came crashing down, despite all the effort Jesus did to kind of bring them into the secret of the Messiah having to die for Israel and for the world. They didn't get it. So it was a quiet, sobering, probably a day of bewilderment, astonished. I could imagine all of them might have been in some ways in shock. Now we know how the story ends, and we are pointed towards Easter, where we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But in this story, the disciples would not have yet known that truth. So this would have been a sobering day of considering the death of their friend. On this day, I think it to take a spirit of quiet and reflection to think about the death of Christ before the resurrection of Christ, how much God loves us for that to have happened, how much he must have cared to send Jesus to die in such a way, how much Jesus had to love us to choose that death. And then to pivot then towards the resurrection to see the great plan of God's redemption ahead of us. On this day of quiet, we've provided some basic instructions for how to have maybe 30 minutes, an hour of quiet reflection. But we invite you to let this text lead you into that place of quiet where you consider the death of Jesus, the love of God, and are pointed towards the hope of the resurrection on Easter Sunday. Grace and peace to you, Horizon Church. We'll see you on Easter Sunday morning.